Yes, folks, you are reading that thumbnail correctly. Daredevil Born Again Season 2 is a massive upgrade compared to the first season from last year. And do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And by anyone, I mean Chris from 3C Films, one of the many content creators that actually got early access to seeing all 8 episodes of Daredevil Born Again before anyone else did. And he deadass believes that Season 1 was much better than Season 2. Even after seeing all the episodes early. And boy oh boy, do I have to tell you that he is just so wrong on this one. And I heard his reasonings for it, and I know he chalked it up to, it's his opinion at the end of the day, and it's a hot take of his. Yeah, you sure damn right it's a hot take. A hot smelting burger take. Total ass. Because yours truly has watched every single episode of Season 2, and yes, I had to watch this weekly. I didn't get early access like all these other hack YouTube creators out here. I had to suffer the weekly format, just like everyone else. And guess what? I thought this season was a total, upgraded banger of a season. The episodes were actually impactful. There was never really a dull moment, no filler episodes really, and they're just better overall characterization, especially for the newer characters from last season that barely got anything. And the characters that barely got any showtime last season, like Bullseye for example, gets a lot more in this season, has a lot of great scenes, actually memorable scenes in fact, and is a major standout amongst many other great characters like Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, and Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. Everyone had a part to play in this season, and it was done a lot more interesting than compared to last season. Things actually progressed in a way that made sense, and a lot of my gripes that I had for last season, I think they really made up for this season. I'm definitely going to cover a lot more highs than I am lows for Season 2, but I think I'm going to have a more major emphasis on the finale because I think the finale really brought things together, and it was actually a much stronger finale compared to not only last season, but any other Disney Plus show, at least within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think Daredevil Born Again Season 2 had a much stronger finale compared to any other finale that has been done within the MCU or any other Marvel show for that matter. What I'm saying is that this had a lot more presence or just as much weight as the original Netflix Daredevil series did, and that's saying a lot. But before I get into all my thoughts on the overall highs and lows of the season and my overall thoughts on the season finale and how awesome it was, I want you guys to go ahead and do your due diligence, as always, and like and subscribe to the channel because you're not going to want to miss out on this certified banger content. And while you consider doing that, also consider commenting during or after you've watched the video, as well as hitting that hype button that's located somewhere in the description box. It's usually located on mobile devices. Doing one of those two things really helps out with that algorithm or pushing this overall content towards the algorithm so that my channel gets exposed to more casual viewers and we bring in a lot more of those viewers onto this channel. So doing any of those things mentioned would be greatly appreciated from yours truly. And with all that being said, folks, let's go ahead and get right into the video. So, to list off my many highs for this particular season, one of my major highs for this season is definitely Matt Murdock, or mainly Daredevil, because we get a lot more Daredevil compared to last season, and we actually see him in the outfit getting to like do shit, do all sorts of shit that actually means something to the overall plot and moves things in a way that's interesting, because last season, all we got to see was Matt Murdock getting bitched out by Foids, him getting bitched out by some homeless dude that was completely ungrateful. We saw all that kind of shit, and it was really annoying to see. And we had to wait for him to, get into the Daredevil outfit. Like, I think it was like the mid-season or whatever. I think it was like episode 5 or 6. It basically what I'm saying is it took a while for him to get right back into the suit and get him to do stuff that we wanted to see Daredevil do from the very get-go. But in this season, Daredevil is not pulling any punches. We start off, just action-packed scenes from the very get-go. He's taking down that ship, trying to foil Kingpin's plans. He's doing all kinds of shit that Daredevil should be doing. And, I saw a lot of people try to give the overall character of Daredevil a lot of shit this season because they felt like he was being completely underutilized or that he was useless and boring. And I'm just going to be honest, I totally disagree with all of that. I think he was always doing something pretty useful or something very meaningful to the plot. And it's not to say there wasn't that overall dynamic where whenever Matt Murdock thought he was getting ahead, Kingpin, of course, would be like, let's say, 2 steps ahead of him and enact some sort of secondary plan that would almost completely demoralize Matt Murdock and the rest of his crew trying to take down the Kingpin and the anti-vigilante task force. And there's this sort of like cat and mouse kind of game with Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk, like who's going to one up the other. And there's so much of that tension being built up throughout the season. Like you never know when Kingpin's just going to reveal to the public that Matt Murdock is in fact Daredevil, or if, someone like Matt Murdock is, he's going to do what it takes to find whoever he needs to leak out Kingpin's plans to the public or have the evidence to do so. And while that's going on, you have this sort of interesting parallelism between Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk and their idea of saving the city or protecting the city that they love. I just think there's this axiomatic theme of who is willing to do what it takes. What are the internal or external sacrifices that have to be made? That's honestly what kept me, glued to my TV screen watching all these different episodes, because there, honestly, like I literally meant when I said at the beginning, there was never a dull moment. I never, got to a point where I felt bored or anything like that. I was completely honed in on the overall tension between Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk. And I don't want to get too ahead of myself talking about how these two characters end up towards the season finale. But before I get into either one of those characters, or mainly Wilson Fisk as the character he is in this particular season, I want to go ahead and touch upon the supporting characters throughout the season, or mainly the ones that didn't really get touched on last season due to the lack of character development. And the two main ones I really want to focus on out of the new characters very briefly are Daniel and Buck. I think Daniel surprised me the most this season because compared to last season where he's just basically a Wilson Fisk ass kisser, this season they kind of put him in a very interesting dilemma where it's like, is he going to go through with carrying out all of Kingpin's plans for taking over the city essentially? Is he willing to go against Kingpin at certain moments, or if he feels like it goes against his overall morality? Because you start to see that he starts to struggle with that, especially with someone like BB Urich in his ear at all times, basically trying to get information out of him. And he's at that point where he's trying not to budge because he's aware of the consequences of going against Fisk, and he knows how dangerous Fisk is, as well as Buck, because he knows somebody like Buck will carry out Wilson Fisk's plan and kill anyone on sight, because he does that a lot this season. And you see this sort of side to Daniel where he does want to maintain some sort of status quo. He wants to have all the cool shit that comes with, doing the job that he does. Basically what I'm saying is he wants to maintain being a little soprano. But all jokes aside, but you do see that sort of side to him, and then you kind of see his overall dynamic with Buck, and you start to see their relationship develop, and they both kind of admire each other throughout the season. And there's that one cool part, or like that one funny part in one of the episodes where Daniel thinks Buck is going to kill him, but of course that's not what happened. Buck basically asked him to get a shovel because they got to bury a dead body. But that stuff like that was so interesting this season, and it was really interesting to see where Daniel ended up, where he actually does do the right thing. He lets BB Urich kind of guilt him into it, because in episode 7, where Daniel's initial mission is to basically try to trap BB Urich, he plants a fake leak just so that she can expose herself and then take her to Buck so that they can kill her. You see him kind of bring her to Buck, or he brings her to the quote-unquote safe house. And of course, BB Urich catches on that, it's not an actual safe house. She's there to die, essentially. And then, of course, she gives him that little pep talk, or not even a pep talk, but she kind of guilts him and says, like, is this the kind of person you want to be? And then you start to see, like, on his face that he is just overwhelmed with guilt, that he knows what he's doing right here is wrong. And so he ultimately lets her go, and then he actually does do the right thing. There's this kind of full circle moment where he initially has this sort of idea that he's doing this all for Fisk. He's doing the right thing. It's for the city. And then, of course, he kind of realizes ultimately, like, no, this is wrong, completely wrong. And I need to do the right thing and kind of stand up to the powers that be, which is Fisk and company. And then, of course, he ultimately kind of goes against Buck, or he actually does go against Buck and tells him to basically fuck off. And then Buck ultimately kills him. And you start to see this sort of guilt, even on Buck's face, as he's like, pulls the trigger. And I thought stuff like that was so interesting between these two. I really like their dynamic this season, their overall relationship with each other. And they did finally answer the question of how Buck was kind of introduced into this whole matter. Like, why is he so beneficial to Fisk? Or like, why does Fisk keep this guy around? Like, who's this rando essentially from season 1? And then, of course, they tie everything together. They actually answer that question. They even, start to bridge the gap between the Netflix series and the Disney Plus series. And they show you that Buck was around during the Netflix series. And they show him that one cool episode, I think one of the best episodes of this season, where it's just basically a part flashback to the early seasons of Netflix, mainly season 1, of course. And you see the old lighting from the Netflix series, and it just goes to show you that Disney does have the capabilities to recreate that Netflix feeling, that overall atmosphere with the cinematography. And not to glaze on the overall cinematography for that particular episode, or just to glaze the fact that it actually felt like the Netflix series, or just had that same feeling to it. But they show you that Buck was around. You know, he knew who Wesley was, and he knew Fisk from the very get-go. They show you that side of him, and I thought that was super interesting. I'm glad they were able to do that and make something interesting out of this character that we really didn't have anything to work with in the first season. And it's not to say there isn't a whole lot of mystery to this character still, because they still kind of left some things a little bit mysterious with this guy, especially with his past. I mean, they give you a little bit of information of like the Special Forces program. I think he was in the Special Forces, or he was in some sort of military group in the UK. Overall, they sprinkle in some of his backstory without giving away too much about this character. I think he's still interesting. I hope they leave some things a little bit more mysterious going forward into the next season. But yeah, I just wanted to briefly cover those two characters because I thought the writers did a pretty good job of actually doing something with them this season and actually making something interesting or worthwhile. Because essentially a lot of people, including myself, had a huge problem with the new characters introduced last season and the fact that they just felt rather useless and just kind of bland overall. Nothing interesting was being done with them, and it just felt like, what was the purpose of including y'all? And why did y'all have to kill off Foggy just to introduce these new characters no one really cares about? But luckily, they gave a lot of the newer characters something interesting to do, or at least the ones that were introduced in season 1 of Born Again. And one more newer character that was introduced last season that I'll mention briefly here in this section before we move on to the next section. And that's BB Urich. You know, she was introduced last season and they revealed that she was Ben Urich's niece, or she is Ben Urich's niece. And you find out towards the ending of season 1 that she's actually around, or she's doing, you know, her journalistic stuff because she wants to avenge her uncle's death and she wants to get back at Kingpin and make him pay for his crimes. And they had those cringe, the BB report or whatever it was called from last season. They didn't do it too much this current season. I'm glad they really didn't, or make it super cringe like they did last season, because that was one of my many downsides of season 1 of Born Again, were the BB reports or whatever they were called. I thought they were super cringe and super annoying, and it really kind of fucked up with the flow of the overall episodes. Despite that, I think they did a lot more with BB Urich this season. I think I liked her character a lot more up until the final episode where, and I'm not going to necessarily, downplay the character herself or, chalk it up to like, oh, I hate this character because of X reason. I think it was mainly because this was more of the fault of the writers not including a scene like this. But when, Daniel ultimately sacrifices himself for her, lets her go, and he chooses to do the right thing when, she was held up and she was initially going to get killed by Buck at that safe house, or quote unquote safe house. And Daniel allows her to, expose Fisk for who he is and all that stuff. He basically gives her a nod that like, yeah, you go do your thing and I'll, do my thing, or essentially sacrifice myself. But after Daniel sacrifices himself and he gets killed by Buck, in the next episode, that being the season finale, BB Urich reveals to the world, or she blows the whole lid off on Fisk's operation with that ship in episode 1 of season 2. And she reveals that she's the one, let's just say cosplaying as Fisk in the BB reports, or like basically making fun of him or doing a parody of the Kingpin. Well, as she's exposing Fisk's operation and then showing all the people that got killed or, were in the crossfire of this whole operation, or just the Fisk's master plan, she shows a picture of Daniel, of course, but I think a much stronger scene that they should have included in the finale was BB mourning over Daniel's death and like showing that sort of side to her that like, yeah, there's a cost to doing this sort of journalistic work. People can get hurt if I, expose all sorts of truths to the city. And this actually happens quite a bit throughout the season where Daniel would tell her something and he basically tells her like, hey, this is off the record. Please don't tell anyone. And then of course she goes and leaks some information that, Daniel wasn't supposed to leak out. And Daniel nearly gets killed many times, or like there's that sort of implication that Buck is on his ass. That happened plenty of times this season, but I think this should have been the one part of the show where they display her lamenting the fact that her doing what she does got Daniel killed, and that I think that should have honestly taken a toll on her, or maybe hint at like the fact that this will take a toll on her in maybe the next season. I think they could have done something like that to set up something very interesting with her character, especially her taking on that new job towards the ending of the season, or like in the final episode at that publication that you see in the original Netflix series. I was just a little disappointed they didn't really do anything with that, or just show that side of her that actually shows that, she actually does care about, putting people's lives at risk or anything like that, especially Daniel's life at risk. I just felt like when she did that final BB report where she unveils that she was the one parroting Wilson Fisk, that whole scene kind of felt very boss bitchy for my taste, and I did not care too much for that. I'm just going to be honest with you. And if you feel like I'm off base with that overall take, feel free to sound off in the comments below. Now, before I get into the overall meat of this video, or like me talking about the overall finale and how excellent it was, I do want to briefly touch upon the supporting characters, that being Karen Page, and very briefly for like 3 episodes, that being Jessica Jones. I really like the supporting characters this season. I definitely like having Karen Page back into the mix because I felt like she was definitely missed last season. I know she was in the first episode and then the very last episode of last season, but I definitely like how she has a much larger presence this season. I liked her and Matt's dynamic. I like that they were dating each other. I like them way better together than I did with Matt and Heather Glenn, because I did not like Heather Glenn. She was a total bitch last season, and she was a total bitch this season. We'll kind of get into her later on. But yeah, I definitely like Karen Page. I thought she was, for the most part, actually useful this season. She was actually trying to get stuff done. And there were some like parts where I thought, like, okay, they're kind of leaning into the boss bitch shit. And then there's these really awkward fight scenes with her where she's like overpowering the anti-vigilante task force guards, or she takes out that one dude with these, and you see there's one in the season finale where everyone's completely making fun of, especially those guys at like Nerdrotic and Company, or the Geeks and Gamer type of YouTubers. They were clowning on that shit, and honestly, like, I agree, it was very cringe and like very boss bitch, like, girls get shit done, she don't need no man. Like, there were some scenes like that I thought were really cringe. But outside of that, no, I actually did like Karen Page this season. I was so happy to see her over Heather Glenn being the love interest, because, you know, she sucks. But I like that one particular episode where Karen Page is like arguing with Matt or Daredevil back and forth about keeping someone like Bullseye alive, and she's like, they're arguing about like morality, like who gets to live, who gets to die, and then that someone like Bullseye or Poindexter was the reason Foggy died. He took all these people's lives, he took these things from us, and yet we're going to allow him to live. I did like her kind of bringing that up to Matt, and him like kind of being like having some sort of conflict with his overall morality, or especially like with his Catholic faith. I think she really brought something interesting out of that. And at the end of the day, she definitely was on board for Matt, or with Matt, for a lot of things. She was constantly, like, she was pushing back at times, but ultimately, like, she did side with Daredevil in the end, even if it caused, you know, Matt Murdock's well-being, or just essentially him ending up in prison at the very ending of the season. We're going to get into that much later. But basically what I'm saying is Karen Page is a goated supporting character. She always has been since the very first season of Daredevil, or the Netflix series. But in this one, of course, like, she actually introduces something interesting to the overall story, especially when at times when she does push back against Matt Murdock and his overall morality, or even like what line should or shouldn't cross. I thought that side was very interesting. But at the end of the day, she's a goated supporting character. But at the same time, you know, you have her, and then of course we don't have Foggy, because of course he's dead. Supposedly, because there is that chance they could bring him back at some point. But, you know, I can't really speak too much on that, or just delve into that too much, because there's not much we can do as the fans to, you know, bring Foggy back. That's up to the writers. Foggy would definitely be appreciated if, you know, he did come back as a character, because I feel like he's definitely the heart of the original series, and him just not being here, it feels like it's really missing something. And I did appreciate the fact that they did include Foggy in that one flashback episode, because like when they had him in that particular episode, and that just having that overall Netflix feeling and the overall Netflix cinematography, dude, that was amazing. I'm just like, we need this back. We need all this back. But I don't want to get too lost in the sauce talking about Foggy Nelson. What I do want to mention before we get into the last section of this video is Jessica Jones. And, you know, I did think what they did with her is very interesting, but I don't think it was as interesting as what they did with The Punisher last season. And he had way less screen time compared to Jessica Jones this season. She was in a lot more episodes, that being one more episode than The Punisher or Frank Castle, because Frank Castle was only in like 2 episodes last season, and Jessica Jones was in a total of 3 episodes this season. But there were times where I'm like, you know, I've really liked having her back on screen, even though they completely nerfed her this season, because they explained that ever since, you know, she's had a kid, there are times where her powers just basically turn off at any given moment, especially when she's fighting against all sorts of goons and whatnot. It was definitely great seeing her back, even though they're like the first time they introduced her in that one episode, I think it was episode 6. They introduce her, and then I almost forgot that she was still around, because they give you this sort of implication that like she was just around for a little bit and then she just fucked off elsewhere. But no, she comes back in episode 7 and 8, of course, and like they give her a little bit more to do. And of course, she does help out in the very final episode. I don't think her powers went out in the final episode where she's fighting all those guys. But yeah, no, I liked having her back, and I thought it was very interesting that she had a kid with Luke Cage. Thought that was very interesting, and I saw a very interesting comment on Twitter, and I thought it was a little too zesty for my taste and just quite unnecessary, but I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, really cool to see Jessica Jones, and I definitely like that they used some notes from the original Jessica Jones series, or at least from the musical score from that series. I thought that was a nice touch, especially when they first introduced her on screen in Daredevil Born Again Season 2. And it was just nice to see her and Daredevil interact, because the last time they interacted with each other, at least on screen, was in The Defenders. And of course, it had been a while, and, you know, Matt Murdock was presumed dead post The Defenders. And then, of course, he wasn't, because we got Daredevil Season 3, and they show the aftermath of him, falling out with Elektra or whatever, when that whole area or that whole setting crumbled down. And they all thought Matt Murdock was dead, but of course he wasn't. And you'd have to assume that Jessica Jones and Matt Murdock really didn't interact ever since then, or even up to until this point in season 2. But of course, there could be some off-screen storytelling there where it's like maybe they did interact at some point with each other. But it's nice to see them catch up and finally interact with one another once again within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And lastly, before we get on to the final section of this video, one more character I do want to bring up, because it would be a sin for me not to bring up this character, and honestly one of the highlights of this season, even in the past season, even though we barely got any sort of screen time with this character, maybe just like for a few episodes. But the character I'm referring to is none other than Benjamin Poindexter, aka Bullseye. Now honestly, Poindexter has been one of my favorite characters ever since he was introduced in Season 3 of the Daredevil Netflix series. I always thought there was something rather unique and complex with this character, and I think they added a lot to his character, especially in Daredevil Born Again. And say what you will about the overall Born Again series and it not having that same level of gravitas that the Netflix series had, I think this particular character in both the Netflix series and the Born Again series, I think he has been consistently great. They always add something new or exciting to his character. There is a sense of unpredictability with Poindexter, and I think him being one of the best characters is simply solidified in the one episode where he calls the anti-vigilante task force into that diner. He basically baits them in, says that Frank Castle is there and he's got a gun and whatnot. But that whole scene right there, and that whole fight choreography, if that didn't solidify to you that he is one of the best characters, or especially newer characters ever since the Season 3 of the Netflix series, then I don't know what will. Additionally, considering the fact that they did add some sort of unique element to his character this season, where they kind of show you that he does have a good side to him. And like, granted, I think he always had a good side to him, but despite all of his psychopathic ways, I do like that they tried to give this character somewhat of a chance to redeem himself in certain areas, especially when he wanted to do one good deed and basically wanted to redeem himself or try to find a way to do so. And maybe in a way that wasn't like super ideal, but at the end of the day, he actually does attempt to do some good, especially saving the governor in the very last episode. I did like certain scenes, especially with him and Matt Murdock, or Daredevil specifically, where Daredevil is like giving this talk about mercy, or like there's those constant flashbacks with him and Foggy and Elsie talking to each other, and there's that whole theme of mercy. And then ultimately Daredevil does show someone like Poindexter mercy, not leaving him to the anti-vigilante task force to take him in and whatnot, because he is pretty much responsible for Vanessa's death, or at least attempting to kill her in this season. But of course, Daredevil does try to give him a chance, and of course, someone like Karen Page doesn't take that very well, especially considering he was responsible for Foggy's death. But I did appreciate little moments throughout the season where they do show a side of him that is a bit remorseful, even though like he may look a little unhinged at times, even when he's being remorseful. But despite all that, I always thought this character had a unique flair to him. I always thought he had that sort of swagger to him, especially with the diner scene and so on. But I am super excited to see where they take his character into the next season, see if, he's just going to be an anti-hero from this point on, because they kind of tease at the very ending of Daredevil Born Again Season 2 that, he's on that airplane with Mr. Charles, and it looks like he's going to be doing some missions for him. Good or bad, we don't know yet, but it looks like Bullseye might be doing some good, because I think Luke Cage even works for this dude, or he was doing like a Heroes for Hire kind of shit. That was the overall implication I got whenever they referenced Mr. Charles and Luke Cage doing some jobs for him. But I think Bullseye's going to be doing the same thing. And I heard that Bullseye is going to be getting a new suit next season, so I am also excited for that. But overall, really like this character. I always have, and I hope they continue to do great stuff with this character. Add more swagger-like scenes, like in the one in the diner when he's ordering that banana milkshake, and even in the last episode where he takes out the poser. I thought all those scenes were so excellent, and honestly, they did not skip a beat with this particular character. But now, folks, it is time to get into the final section of this video. I am officially done with yapping about some of the newer characters and the returning characters, of course, and how amazingly well they did with those characters, or, you know, for the most part, did pretty well with writing those characters. I do want to briefly cover the overall season finale and just my initial thoughts on how I think they really landed on the season finale. They really landed the plane with how they left things off and just how things progressed in a way that made sense. And the elephant in the room that I think really needs to be addressed is the courtroom scene, or essentially the altercation between Matt Murdock and Kingpin, or Wilson Fisk, in the courtroom. And I thought this whole scene was done so well. There was so much tension being built up, you know, because you have this overall tension whether, you know, Matt Murdock is going to reveal himself to the public or whether, you know, Wilson Fisk is going to expose him first. Well, of course, you know, as they're, you know, going back and forth in the courtroom, and, you know, Wilson Fisk is kind of taunting Matt Murdock and even like whispering under his breath, and he says, "You're a fool. You really want to do this?" Like, having those little moments was so excellent, and stuff like that. I always thought their dynamic with each other was so unique, especially from the Netflix series, and I think they've done a pretty good job with adding on to that in Born Again. And I know people give Born Again a lot of shit, but I think they've handled their overall character dynamic with one another, that being Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk. And, you know, when it gets to that point where Matt Murdock does finally reveal to the courtroom that he is in fact Daredevil, just to land the final blow against Wilson Fisk and just blowing up his entire operation to expose the fact that he was responsible for the illegal operations or the illegal smuggling of weaponry. And Matt Murdock basically saying that he is one of the witnesses to all of this happening, you know, because that's why he has to expose himself as Daredevil, just to basically say, hey, I was one of the witnesses, here's your proof. And when all this goes down and Matt Murdock is revealed to be Daredevil to the public, there's this one really underrated yet cool moment from Wilson Fisk where you see this sort of micro expression on his face where it's like, you know, as all this is going down, he's not only just surprised, but he's actually kind of admirable that, you know, Matt Murdock has balls. And honestly, I think this is why their dynamic has always been so special, because deep down, Wilson Fisk has always admired Matt Murdock to some extent, regardless of the times that he's wanted to kill him. He is very admirable of Matt Murdock, and I think honestly the best kind of adversaries to have are the ones you secretly admire, and Wilson Fisk is a prime example of this. And honestly, this whole sequence just highlights that whenever Daredevil does these sort of dramatic sequences well, it really does it well. And I think that's always been the appeal of Daredevil ever since the Netflix series, is the dramatic appeal to it, especially when Matt Murdock is, you know, being the lawyer that he is, and he's, you know, giving effective arguments in the courtroom. I think that's the true gravitas of Daredevil, are these sequences and the dramatic dialogue between, you know, so many different characters. And I think they were trying to go for this approach in the first season of Born Again, but of course it ultimately fell flat, with the exception of the one episode where Daredevil, or Matt Murdock, defends White Tiger in court. I think that was the only effective episode in that season, or in terms of like Matt Murdock being a lawyer in season 1 of Born Again. But of course, like I said, the writing wasn't there, but I definitely feel the writing for this season, especially with the courtroom scene, is a lot stronger. But yeah, the dramatic sequences for this particular season was very well done, a lot better than season 1 of Born Again. And what I also think was done a lot better, or maybe just on par with each season, because I think the fight choreography for both seasons have been pretty good for the most part, but I think it was a lot more prevalent in this season. And I definitely want to touch upon the overall sequence in this final episode where Wilson Fisk, his back is against the wall, he's been exposed, he's down on his last legs, essentially, or metaphorically speaking, and he's essentially asked to step down as mayor, and they basically give him a plea deal, or they give him a deal where it's like he has to leave New York City and go somewhere else. He won't have to face prison time or anything like that. All he has to do is leave all of this behind. And of course, he doesn't go out without a fight. And because, you know, he wants to hold all this thing together. He wants to protect the city. He wants to control it. And especially everything that's gone down with, you know, him losing his wife and him feeling like he really has nothing left but, you know, taking care of the city as the mayor, or his version of taking care of the city. And so, of course, he's not going to take this lightly, and he's going to put up a fight against his haters, the protesters, the rioters. And this whole sequence, when he's just like mowing down all these protesters and just knocking them out, I thought this shit was so funny. And dude, we have to talk about how they always make protesters or rioters in any form of media have absolutely no aura. It's like, how many times have you seen any rioter or protester in any form of media have any sort of aura, or where we were supposed to like them as the audience? Because I don't think there's ever really been a time where I'm actually rooting for the rebels other than Star Wars, but even then, like more modern day Star Wars projects, I'm never rooting for the rebels. I'm rooting for the Empire. That's really besides the point, but the point I'm bringing here is that, when Wilson Fisk is taking down all these protesters, like, I was actually rooting for him because how cringe these people were. It's like, how do you fumble? Like, just, you're all one group. Like, this is essentially 100 men versus one gorilla brought to its logical conclusion if you don't do it properly. And the protesters in this episode did not do that properly. They were just waiting their turn to try to knock out Fisk. And of course, he mows down a lot of them. He knocks them out, breaks their jaw, breaks their backs. You name it, he does it to these protesters. And honestly, rightfully so. And while Fisk is taking down 100 different people in the courthouse, we have Daredevil and Jessica Jones on the other end of the courthouse, taking out all these different guards and this really cool hallway fight scene. And they always do such a good job with the hallway fight scenes. Because, if you bring Daredevil into a hallway, it's over. But yeah, there was that really cool fight sequence. But then, of course, they had to bring the little midget girl, little white tigress into the mix. And yeah, I hate to say it, folks. I've never liked this character. Can't stand her stupid fucking face and those stupid mannerisms every time she talks. Her jawline just starts quivering, and she's always talking back to somebody. She's always like I'm a boss bitch. I don't need no man to help me out. Fuck everybody else. I just can't stand this character. I always thought she was cringe. Just please write her off out of the show. Get her off, please. As well as that dumbass Tia of hers. I think it's her aunt, but regardless, those two characters are so annoying, and they need to write them out of the show. But not to get too lost in the sauce making that stupid point. I do want to get to the part where Wilson Fisk is he's in the main commons area of the courthouse, and he's about to take on everyone, and the people are starting to finally make a dent to this guy, beat him down, and then of course Daredevil has to come in and save the day, try not to get these people to kill Wilson Fisk, because he actually does. He wants to somewhat redeem Fisk in this moment and try to get him to take the deal that he's been offered. And, Jessica Jones is trying to help him out with that, pulling all these different protesters back, the cringe-looking protesters that have no fucking aura whatsoever. Despite all that, there is this, really cool moment where, Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk kind of have this sort of heart-to-heart moment. And it's a moment that kind of parallels the finale of the season 3 Netflix series, where they're both down on their last leg and they're trying to negotiate with one another. And if you remember in season 3 where Matt's you have to promise me you will not bring any sort of harm to Karen Page or Foggy Nelson, and then I'll let you see your precious Vanessa or whatever. And then of course they make that deal. Well, then, of course, in this season, this is a similar altercation, but one that doesn't really end in any sort of bloodshed or bloodshed with each other is what I'm saying. There's no throwing hands at each other. It's more of a peaceful altercation between the two. And it's actually a role of reversal, which if you don't know too much about yours truly, one of my favorite plot devices in any form of storytelling is the role of reversal. And this whole sequence right here is such a great example of that. There's no fist fighting or anything like that. And granted, we do get a fist fight between these two in a couple episodes prior to this one, which was awesome. But I think the way things ended here was super ideal. It made sense for the story they're going with here. And I really liked how this all ended out. Almost a bit of poetic justice, because of course Matt Murdock does end up in prison towards the ending of the season, for the greater good, essentially giving up the fact that he's probably never going to be a lawyer ever again, since he's being incarcerated for being a vigilante and all these other sort of crimes that they pin against him. And then of course, when Wilson Fisk does take the deal, he's completely isolated on a beach outside of New York City. And the worst thing about this for him is that he's no longer in the city that he loves. He has no control over anything. He doesn't have his wife, Vanessa. This whole setting right here is his own prison. It's his metaphorical prison, if you will, while Matt Murdock is actually in a prison, while being content with that fact. And it's just that overall juxtaposition that just brings that sort of icing to the cake. But yeah, I really liked this season finale. I liked how things ended off. But one thing I do want to go ahead and mention, and this unfortunately happened to me before I even watched the finale, and that was the fact that I had Matt Murdock going to prison or ending up in prison completely spoiled for me. And the fact that Wilson Fisk would not be the mayor towards the ending of the season. And honestly, I kind of figured that's how they were going to end things from the very get-go before certain factors came into play, which is the Spider-Man Brand New Day trailer showing the fact that Wilson Fisk Fisk is not the mayor, and it's that assistant of his that is now the mayor. And then, of course, Matt Murdock ending up in prison was spoiled to me by, I think it was Mike Coulter, the guy that plays Luke Cage. He accidentally spoiled Matt Murdock being in prison because he took a selfie of him on set of Daredevil season 3, and it shows Charlie Cox in the prison jumpsuit. And I was just like, damn it, I kind of wish I hadn't known about that. But of course, yours truly got spoiled for the ending of the season. But luckily, that did not ruin it for me, and I still enjoyed this overall season nonetheless. And one more thing that I'll mention before we finally bring this video to a conclusion, and it's the fact that I don't like the fact that a lot of YouTubers got early access to all the episodes, because a lot of those assholes were teasing certain things and overhyping a lot of episodes, which I do not care for. And I also don't know why they let all these sort of content creators and influencers get this sort of early access. I understand it's for reviews, but at the same time, it's just like, I feel like you're just rubbing it in our faces of those who have to watch the week to week format, or this weekly format. And one thing I'm really hoping they change going forward is not doing the weekly route. Of course, I know they're going to stick to this format, but I wish they dropped all the episodes at once so that a lot of elements don't get spoiled, or a lot of story beats do not get spoiled for the season, because unfortunately for yours truly, I got spoiled on a lot of different areas, and I wish I hadn't. And it's just stuff like that that annoys the fuck out of me when it comes to this sort of content, or just this, like, oh, I get to review this, get to see all these episodes before you guys. Because you know why? It should be me getting all this access and reviewing it for you guys, not these posers out here who don't give a shit about the material. But all jokes aside, yeah, I can't stand spoilers. I don't like spoiler culture. I may have to make a separate video on that whole subject matter one of these days, probably not in the not too distant future. But despite all the spoilers, still enjoyed this season, and I look forward for what's to come. But actually, one of my cons for the season that I didn't really mention earlier that I should have, of course, I don't like Little White Tiger's bitch, didn't like her aunt, and some of the parallelism to the real world, I thought at times was a little cringe, because it's like, they want you to feel like this is the most evil thing in the world, like seeing these task force agents take all these people out, like the illegals or whatever, the parallelism to like ICE agents stripping away illegals from places they shouldn't be in. And it's like, you want me to feel bad for these people in this like TV series, or it's like trying to parallel those sort of events. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't feel bad. It's like this is actually kind of awesome. And then of course, you know, you have like the ICE parallelism, you have the Trump allegories with Wilson Fisk. And it's like, they really want you to hate this character. They really want you to hate the fact that he's just like Donald Trump. But then it's like, you know what? The difference between Kingpin and Donald Trump is that Kingpin actually gets shit done. And I said this for my thoughts on the last season. It's like, no, Wilson Fisk is just a cooler version of Trump. And if Trump, you know, wasn't a total chicken, he didn't go full taco and actually lived up to being a quote unquote fascist. And Kingpin overall just has a lot more aura than Donald Trump, or at least modern day Donald Trump. And outside of the cringe allegories, or the lack thereof, in an effective way, he had some characters like Heather, who, I mean, I don't even know if I would say I didn't really like her this season, but I think they kind of immersed the fact, or it kind of fully delved into the fact that she is such a bitch and a psychotic one, and that no one really liked her last season. I'm kind of glad they doubled down on that, and they're just basically turning her into a female muse, because that's basically what they did with her character this season. She completely regressed into being Muse, the guy that almost killed her, actually, and now she's going to become the person that nearly tried to kill her. And I did see some set photos, unfortunately, of her in the Muse outfit, her taking on the Muse mantle, if you will. And it's just, you know, stuff like that. I didn't necessarily mind, but outside of her and her overall character regression, I don't really have too many cons for this season. I think I guess more of a personal preference that I wish they would consider going forward is maybe adding more episodes per season, and maybe adding longer run times for each episode, because I felt like a lot of the episodes this season were very short, and I'm just like, damn, that was so good, but I have to wait till next week to watch this episode. And I'm just like, damn it, I wish I would not fucking do that, because I'm watching a streaming service. I'm not on fucking cable television, bitch. And something else I hope they consider doing less of next season, or just, you know, just tone down the allegories, or the Trump allegories, or the MAGA parallelisms, because that shit is so cringe. Nobody actually cares about that shit. And people who actually eat that up are lame as fuck, okay? Y'all are lame as fuck. And y'all are complete normies when it comes to having political conversations. I would know, because I deal with them all the time. But yeah, going forward, I hope they tone shit like that down and just delve into what makes Daredevil Daredevil. Bring in more of that dramatic gravitas. Give us more dramatic tension between characters. And honestly, I don't know how they're going to go about next season, because I know they're bringing the Defenders back since Matt Murdock is in prison now. And of course, Matt Murdock can't go back to being a lawyer. So that's going to be really interesting to see how they handle that going into season 3. And I'm curious what they're going to do with Heather Glenn, if, Karen Page is going to kill that bitch, because, those two have some unresolved beef with each other. Let's just say that. And I definitely hope the Defenders have a lot more screen time next season, and their appearances in each of the episodes do not feel short-lived, similar to how they kind of did Jessica Jones this season, or even the Punisher in season 1 of Born Again. And it's not even to say that they should have more screen time than Matt Murdock, but let's just say I want their screen time to be very satisfying and not completely short-lived. But actually, one more thing I need to mention, is this is another elephant in the room that I did not mention earlier in this video. And my main question is, where is that fraud Spider-Man during all these events, or even going into season 3 of Daredevil Born Again? Where the fuck is this fraud? And why is he receiving a key to the city? Spider-Man? More like Spider-Bitch. But nah, all jokes aside, folks, I think that's going to do it for this video. I want to hear from you guys now. What did you guys think of Daredevil Born Again Season 2? Did you like it? Did you not? Definitely want to hear from you guys in the comments section. And while you consider commenting down below, also consider liking and subscribing to the channel, because you're not going to miss out on these certified bankers. You're just not going to want to do that. As well as hitting that hype feature that's located in the description box. I definitely want to get this video promoted onto the algorithm, as well as this overall channel. Once you guys see this content, and there's plenty more to choose from, of course, and there's going to be some videos on this screen right here, or some links to some of my other videos. It's going to recommend you what YouTube thinks is best, and then what I think is best for you. But with all that being said, folks, thanks for tuning into this video and watching to the very end, and I will catch you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.